Hello everybody, welcome to Running a Building Event for Event Supervisors. I am Ian Emmons and I'm accompanied by my wife Karen Emmons. We are the event group leaders for the building events in Virginia. And this video is an introduction to running building events in Virginia. And what is a building event? Well, it's an event where students build a device before the tournament according to a set of parameters given in their rules. And then at the tournament, the event supervisor tests the devices to score them. There are some events called hybrid events that also have a written test as well as a building portion. And sometimes in a hybrid event, we divide the duties between multiple event supervisors. So that'll be something for you to ask about. This presentation assumes you are working a VASO regional or state tournament. If you are working a different kind of a tournament, like an invitational, then we have a different presentation for those tournaments. So you may want to stop this and go watch that instead. If you're new to supervising a building event, a few items here. ES stands for event supervisor. It's really the judge, but it sounds less judgy. And it's a big job. So we're very thankful for you pitching in this way. It is a big job. There is a lot of information in this video, so you may end up needing to watch this video in pieces or watch it multiple times to really figure it all out. There's a VASO resources page, the URL is given right there, that has additional resources on impound, appeals, resources that are targeted at specific events, and another video there called Reading the Rules that we highly recommend you watch. And you should probably have your rules in hand when you watch it. It'll help you to understand how all the pieces of the rules fit together and what to look for in your particular event. And then, as I said, Karen and I are the event group leaders for most of these events. They are your point of contact for questions and information about your role. Okay, before the tournament, VASO creates a Google folder for each build event ES. And in this Google folder, you will find a copy of your rules, VASO clarifications, which change until close to the tournament. So you want to keep an eye on those on the VASO website. There's a scoring checklist, which is the scoring, the pieces of the score for an individual team, and you'll need one physical copy, one paper copy per team competing in your tournament. There's a scoring spreadsheet that does all the heavy lifting of computing the scores, the final scores, and a tournament schedule and various event-specific information as well. Few words about the rules. I did just say that you'll have a Google folder that has your rules in it, but if you are watching this video early in the season, that folder may not have been created yet, or you may not know what event you are being assigned to yet, in which case you can download all the rules from the national website, which is that first URL given there. The rules are divided into two rule books, one for Division B, one for Division C, so make sure you get the right one. And please make sure you have current rules from this year, because they change a lot from year to year. The clarifications page on the VASO website is important. You really need to know these clarifications because they also are rules. And at VASO tournaments, only VASO clarifications apply. There are VASO-specific versions of the checklists for the event, and those will typically include clarifications that we have published. And then finally, on tournament day, you need a laptop. That's very important because you will definitely want to use the scoring spreadsheet in the Google folder. Okay, materials. You need to know what you need to run your event and who is providing those things. On the resources page, there is a supply list. Those lists have been very carefully compiled. They're quite comprehensive. So have a look at that, and make sure you know who is providing all of those things. On competition day, when you check in, you will receive a packet that has rules, clarification schedule, phone numbers, other information, and all of that's really useful for your reference, but you will not have enough time to read it. So make sure you've looked at rules and clarifications ahead of time. I've mentioned already these paper scoring checklists for each team. Please do not enter the scoring info directly into the scoring spreadsheet, but instead write it on the checklists as the teams come through. These become an important record of what happened during the event, and you can actually write notes in the margin and so on of anything unusual that happened, and those notes become very useful later on, particularly if there's an appeal for that team. And then finally, you're responsible for the VASO materials that we've provided. So, please take a little care in unpacking and repacking and using them through the day.
All right, so now we're going to start talking about what happens on tournament day. This is a sample tournament day schedule, so this is not specific to the one that you're going to be necessarily at, but just to show you the flow of the tournament day. So it starts with setup in the morning. Now it tells you a time usually when the doors open. Typically, that's when the doors open for teams to come in and check in, but check with your event group leader, your Eagles, to find out if maybe the doors are going to open earlier for you to be able to come in and set up. That is typically the way that things happen at the tournament. When you come in, the first thing you'll do is you'll go to the ES check-in first. You'll get a packet, you'll get a t-shirt, you're going to get a name tag, that's your official ID. You'll be provided, your supplies will be there, though any large items might be at wherever your event's being held. Then you'll next see that there is impound, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Only certain events are impound. Then the competition day is divided into sessions. They're typically 50 to 60 minutes long, depending on the tournament. Now, most build events are down at the bottom of the schedule, and then it says Sched in the boxes during the different competition sessions. What that tells you is that teams self-sign up for a time for a competition session where they want to compete. They're not told specifically when they have to come. The schedule of the teams and what sessions they've signed up for will be in your packet. But there are some of those events, those hybrid events that have a written test where students are being pulled from the written test for a device testing, and they have specific times in the day. So you'll also can find that in the schedule too. So they're not signing up for a specific time. You'll notice there's some breaks between the sessions, a little bit of a longer break for lunch. And then at the end of the day, there's a time to pack up and compile and submit the scores. Everything I just said is on this slide, so you can refer back to it at your leisure. So let's take the different components of the day. Setting up your competition space. First thing, leave yourself enough time to do it. It always takes longer than you think, especially if this is your first time doing it. And the timing is particularly important if you need to be ready for the rush of impound. So if you have an impound event, you want to be as set up as you can be before impound begins, because the kids will be waiting for you, ready to do impound. Be thoughtful about how you set up your space. If you have to move items to set up, please take a picture to help you remember how it was so you can put it back at the end of the day. Think about where you want to put an impound area if you have impound. So how much room do you need for that? Can you see the impound area from where you are, from the competition area, because you want to keep a bit of an eye on it. And ideally you want that area away from spectators. You'll also want to leave plenty of space between where the competitors are showing their device to you and where the spectators are. So that's a safety issue in part because there can be flying pieces, but also you don't want the spectators right there in your face. And particularly, don't set up a table, a work table for yourself that's right where the spectators are, where spectators can see your papers. Caution tape is your friend. So you will definitely get some of that in the box when you show up at tournament, and you're going to want to string it and set up the areas for your competition and your impound space with it. Okay, I've said the word impound a few times. Some build events require their device to be impounded. And what that means is dropped off before the competition begins and kept with the ES throughout the day and kept untouched by the ES. So once devices are impounded, the team doesn't get to go in and do anything again with them until they come to you to compete. Now, there's an impound FAQ available on that resource page we've talked about. I highly recommend it. It's also written from the perspective of what questions students might be asking about impound, so you'll be able to see a lot more information than I can present here. But it's important to know what needs to be impounded for your event. And section 2 of your rules will outline that information. And then you'll have those checklists, and you'll give every student one of those and have them fill out just the top part of it with their name and school, and then leave it with their device in the impound. If the device is being impounded by team members other than those who built it, and that's allowed, they may not be able to sign the I built it statement. There's an I built it statement. We'll talk about that later. And that's okay. You can have the builders do it when they come for their competition time. Now, even if your event is not an impound event, it's a good idea to be present during impound. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, teams may need to switch or even schedule their competition times if they didn't do it ahead of time. So, and I'll show you what one of those schedules looks like on the next slide. Also, the tournament may have a designated practice time for teams in the space during impound. That often happens for the flying events. And then also you could be setting up during that time. So it's useful to be present during impound. One of the things about impound that's important to do before you get there is to think about whether you want to do any construction checks during impound. Now, that really depends on your event. If the construction parameters have to be measured in the ready to run position, then you're certainly not going to do any, right? There's no time for them to set them up and then put it back in their box. If you have a lot of teams to impound, probably not. You might be able to do something like measure everyone's masses or a specific thing, but think carefully about what has to be measured. Can you do something easily without having them unbox their equipment and rebox it to help you? But most of those construction checks will probably happen during the competition time. And the other thing I want to say about that is you don't do construction checks without them present, though. So they don't, you don't like get everybody impound and then have a few minutes left and start doing construction checks. We always do construction checks with students present. We don't want to be handling their devices. Finally, don't leave the impound area unattended during the day. So you can use your volunteers for that if you have to step away for a few minutes. I promised that I would show what one of those self-scheduled event papers looks like that you would get first thing in the morning. This is a small snippet of one, but you can see that what it shows you is there's those 7 sessions that you saw on the schedule, the competition times. It has a number of slots of teams that could sign up for that session, and then you can see the number that actually signed up. So you can see that there's room in session 1 and session 2 for another team. Session 3 is full. And then at the bottom of the page, and this page would go on even further than you can see here, would be the specific teams that have signed up in the session.
Okay, the flow of a session. All the teams in a particular session should arrive at the beginning of that session. And as the teams arrive, you want to check wristbands and goggles. And I also like to hand out score sheets if it's not an impound event. If it's an impound event, you did that during impound. But otherwise, you want to hand out score sheets and have them fill out those top few lines of identifying information. The team number is the most important thing. They should sign the I built it statement and look at the kit and 3D printer checkboxes. And this is ridiculous, but they won't have a pen. They should all have a pen, but they won't have a pen. So make sure you have a few for them to use. And then it's important to realize you may take the teams in a session in any order. So in a full session, I like to ask who has an event in the next session and take those teams first in case I run over a little bit. And then as the teams compete, check them off on the sign up and the event roster, which we'll talk about this later, but that's important to make sure that no score sheets get lost. I mentioned checking wristbands. All the competitors should be wearing wristbands with their team number on them. And when they come to you, you want to make sure, first of all, that they have wristbands. The wristbands must be on their wrists, not in their pockets. And the students from a particular team should have the same team number on their wristbands. And you want to make sure that you haven't seen that team number before. So, you know, that's a good reason to be checking them off on your list. It's an easy way to keep track. And if you encounter students that don't have a wristband or have mismatching wristbands or some other irregularity, tell them that you will get them in during the day. They have not missed the event, but do not take them then. Send them away to their coach to deal with the issue, and then test them later. I have made this mistake, and I can tell you it really messes up the whole tournament for a school if you do this wrong. Also, coaches have wristbands of a different color, and we'll touch on that a little later. Okay, goggles. You're also, in most of these building events, you're checking for goggles. Event rules specify what type of goggles. There are type A, type B, or type C goggles, or none. There are some build events that don't require goggles at all. That'll be right near the top of the event rules. And what do type A, type B, and type C mean? Well, type A is just basic goggles. It means that they have one of these ratings, a Z87, Z87.1, or a Z87 plus rating. Type B is a high impact goggle, and this is only Z87 plus goggles. That plus is mandatory. And type C is splash protection goggles. These, most building events don't have these. These are more common in chemistry, but some building events do. So these have any one of those Z ratings with indirect vents, not perforations, but indirect vents. If you're not sure what that means, ask at the tournament and somebody can show you. Lots of people know that difference. Now, those ratings, those ANSI ratings, can be hard to see. They're usually embossed on clear plastic, and so they're difficult to see. Often above the nose or on the temple, and I find the easiest way is to hold the goggles in front of a blank sheet of paper or to use a flashlight, and then they become much easier to see.
All right, so what happens when you take a team in to compete? First, it's important to realize that all teams have to receive the same testing conditions in the same amount of time. So think about it this way. Try to give the same instructions to each team. A script can help with this. In the off chance you've applied a rule incorrectly at first, you need to apply it incorrectly all day. So that way everybody is having the same conditions when they compete. Don't touch their devices yourself. We've said this already. So you ask them to put it in position, to remove it, to do whatever they need to do to set it up. Unless safety is an issue, all devices should be tested, even if they aren't compliant with the rules. I guess the only exceptions to that would be something like if you can't test them, like maybe they don't fit on the device tester, or a weight doesn't hang from them. That would be another condition you just because you can't test them. But you should test them if you can and if it's safe. Ian talked about the goggles. You need to make sure that the students are wearing them through all of their device trials. And it's just best to have them put them on when they come into the competition area. A lot of times they'll have it on their forehead and they'll forget to move it down. So try to keep on top of that. And you and your volunteers need to wear goggles as well for the safety as well. If the students don't bring the properly rated goggles, they can't compete. So this would be another one of those situations where you send, like with the wristbands, you send them off to go deal with the issue. Sometimes just another team that's waiting to compete will hand their goggles over and share, but they have to have the correct goggles. And then remember that competitors can be afraid to speak out, especially the little ones. So be kind and just actively elicit their questions. Still judge properly. You have to judge properly and fairly, but you can be kind as you do that. Number 2 slide on this. So while you're testing them, there should be no outside help or coaching from outside of the competition area. So no coaches shouting instructions in, spectators. This would count as a competition violation. And it's in your right to give a warning. Sometimes, like if I hear a parent or teammate start to get a little overexcited, I might caution the crowd to keep this from happening. But if you've given a warning, if it's covered, it's up to you to judge it. And if it's crossed your own personal threshold on that, and they don't stop, you should bring egregious violations to appeals. Be sure to tell the team if they take any penalties. And I'm not just talking about this outside help thing. If they're tiered or if they take a point penalty, show them their score sheet when you're done with the testing of them. But don't comment on their device's performance compared to others. This can be really misleading for teams, especially like early in the day. And if you were to tell them that they had an amazing device and they walk away thinking they're going to take first, and then maybe there's 6 other amazing devices in the afternoon. You don't want to create that confusion for teams. And try not to give anything away with your face either. I know it's very hard not to get excited when a team does really well. But, again, a team might ask you, well, was that a good try? What's a good try? And you can tell them you can't comment. You can tell them they did a good job. But don't comment on their performance compared to others. Ian mentioned taking note on the checklist in case an issue comes up later and you need to refer back to it. You can even just do it as a matter of course so you remember each team. You'll get a folder when you check in from us. That's a good place to store your checklists after you've completed them. Don't leave them out on a table. You want to be really organized about where you put them so none of them get lost, because you might have a big stack of paper, and I think both Ian and I have had situations where we've misplaced the score sheet and had to rummage around in a frantic craziness to try to find it. Unless the team is planning on appealing, when they're done, they should take their devices away with them, right? You don't want to end up with a whole set of devices at the end of the day. You don't know when anybody's going to come pick it up. So please encourage them, if they're not going to appeal, to take their device away. All right, you've heard us talk a couple of times about the I built it statement on the score checklist. The score sheets have an I built it statement under the students identifying information. Essentially, they're signing that they or students on their 15-person team are the only people who built the device. And that reflects our building policies. So just that team members sign that. And they, sometimes when they're really little, they'll be like, do I have to write in cursive? I don't know how to write in cursive. They're just putting their name down. They're just asserting that they did indeed build it. And then also nearby, there are check boxes to see who used a kit or a 3D printer. Now, these aren't disallowed. It's just useful to know so you can ask questions specific to those situations. And we have something called the VASO construction policy that is about those situations. So the VASO construction policy, which you can find on the policies page of the VASO website, has several things about construction, but I'm going to highlight the primary three things that relate to you here. The first is that only students can do construction work on the device built for tournament. Now, the parents can build testing devices, parents can watch, but students or the competitors have to do all the construction. Then there's also a statement about kits. It says, and this is just a blurb out of it, but it says, teams are permitted to construct their devices from purchased complete kits as long as those complete kits are substantially modified. I'm going to address substantially modified in a second. We have a similar statement about digital fabrication, which would be 3D printing or like
CNC mill,
yeah,
laser
CNC
cutter.
Thank you. So, and that is teams are permitted to use CAD files created by people not on their team, as long as either those files or the objects resulting from the fabrication of those files are substantially modified. All right, so we've seen the statement substantially modified twice. And what we mean by that is a modification that without it, the device would operate differently or would not operate. So a substantial modification is not painting something a color, right? But, it could be replacing a part of it. In digital fabrication, for example, a lot of those pieces are parts of a whole. So it's substantially modifying it for just to put it into its own, another setting than what that file created. So or maybe in a kit, it's changing out the wheels or putting a braking system on it. So these are the kinds of substantial modifications to kits that we're looking for. And the goal with that is to ensure that students own their builds. Now, you don't need to be an expert. This sounds like a scary thing. Just talk to the competitors. Ask them about their builds. See how they fit the kit or the fabrication into their final product. Ask them what they did to it, how they fixed it up, what kind of work, what kind of changes they had to make it. These are the kinds of questions that they should be able to talk to you about, and hopefully excitedly, too. Let's take a section and talk about appeals. All right, you've heard us mention that a few times. At a tournament, or at least at a regional and state tournament, VASO has a committee of people with deep science Olympiad knowledge who will adjudicate appeals from coaches who believe that there's been an unfair judging decision or action. And there is an appeals FAQ on that same VASO resources page, and I would highly encourage you to read that as well. So how might that happen? Team members and the head coach may approach the event supervisor to make inquiries about an appeal. Now, these people wear wristbands. This is why we were saying the head coach has a wristband too. You don't discuss this issue with others. You don't talk to parents about it or just spectators. And I want to say it's important to realize that VASO does not think you have failed if you have an appeal. Teams can file an appeal because, they just want a measurement rechecked, or maybe they didn't understand a rule. So it's not a statement against you, all right? And we're there to help you deal with it. And in fact, it's even okay to suggest that a team file an appeal, right? Appeals is a resource for you too. Now, you have to make your judging call, but you can make a judging call and say to the team, if you want, you can file an appeal on that call, or if you feel like that was a call and you had to make it and you weren't certain of it, That's kind of the way to go about that. But do know that teams filing appeals have to leave their device with you. If they take the device away, that appeal is not valid no matter what, because obviously they could be fixing up their device or something like that. So this is why we're talking about keeping detailed notes, keep detailed notes on controversial issues and dialogue to aid them. Appeals would come by and talk to you about it. You'll even have a phone number for appeals. You could call them if you were to need to. Though you do need to realize, of course, that they can't come the minute you call them. They might be involved in something else. So that's how appeals works. Spectator interference. This is a hard thing to talk about because that's one of the joys and one of the challenges of judging a building event where you're doing it in front of other people. It's not a big problem, but some preparedness goes a long way to help make sure it isn't, right? And one of the best ways is that caution tape friend we talked about. Create clear spectator boundaries, right? Set back the competition from caution tape so that only teams and tournament staff can be inside that. And if somebody comes to you and says, can I come inside the caution tape and take pictures of the team? The answer to that is no. You can speak to somebody outside. You're allowed to talk to spectators, and you can come to the border when you choose. But remember, discuss results with no one except competitors, coaches, or the appeal staff. And just be cautious as you discuss judging decisions with people. You don't want to, give fuel for an appeal, but you want to give honest and real answers as well, too. And answering questions is okay. But like prolonged answers where you're defending yourself, that indicates maybe some questionable behavior on the part of the people who are talking to you. But as I said, it's okay to talk with spectators. They can be fun, right? They're excited about it. Maybe they're parents whose kids were in a different event and they don't know this event, so they just want to talk to you about what this event's about. And that's okay, but don't let it interrupt your testing. And there can be useful ways to break off a chat if you're not sure. You could just say, I can't discuss this anymore. I need to get back to testing. If that doesn't work, you can escalate a little and just turn your back on them and busy yourself with papers. If they continue to engage, you can say things like, further delaying of judging will require us to ask for interference. If they're making inappropriate comments, ask them for their name and the school and tell them that you're going to be reporting their comments. If anyone's behavior is just wrong and you aren't sure what to do, you're going to have some phone numbers on your packet. You can call the score room, appeals, or the tournament director for help, all right? But again, most spectators are excited and eager and just are very happy to be there and see the wonderful thing the kids are doing.
Okay, so let's talk about tournament day volunteers. These are people, often parents, that are usually provided by teams to help you out throughout the day. And you can assign them to do many different things. They can usher kids through the process. This is really useful during impound, also in hybrid events. They can time things with stopwatches. They can measure things for you. They can reset equipment for the next team and clean up at the end of the day. These volunteers work a set amount of time, and so they'll rotate through the day. You won't have the same volunteers all day. We try to overlap them somewhat so that a volunteer who's about to leave can train an incoming volunteer for you. And another really good thing to use these volunteers for is to sit with impound to make sure that the impound is always attended, so that you can use the restroom or get some food or a drink. And you will be assigning their tasks to them. So think a little bit about how you want to use them through the day ahead of time. And then finally, Karen mentioned that that teams will ask, well, did did I do well? Am I was that a good time or whatever? And you need to tell these volunteers not to discuss those results, because teams will ask them just as much as they'll ask you.
Or even ask, or even as they leave from volunteering with you through the day, they shouldn't be discussing it with others either.
Also true. Scoring. Scoring in the building events mainly consists in transferring the results on the checklists into the scoring spreadsheet, because the scoring spreadsheet does the heavy lifting of actually computing scores and ranks for you. So throughout the day, when you have breaks, if you can use that time to transfer those results from the paper score sheets into the spreadsheet, it will really expedite scoring and help you out at the end of the day. But after all the teams have completed, you have to finish that process. And then you're going to bring your computer, the score sheets themselves, your event roster, and score summary, other scoring data to the score room. The score room will keep the score sheets, and it will take a copy of the spreadsheet as well. And those often get used for late appeals. And then, and this is an important point, ties must be broken. This is a really fundamental aspect of scoring in Science Olympiad, is that we don't have ties. So have a look at the scoring section in your rules to see how that is done. Oftentimes the spreadsheet does it for you, but not always.
I'm actually going to amend that to say that in the last year or two, we've started to see events that will allow ties, and they explicitly acknowledge that. The vehicle events are one of those.
That's true, but if your event, if the scoring section in your event rules does not explicitly allow ties, then assume that they are not allowed. Okay, so when the scoring's finished, you're going to organize the papers in team number order. You want to make sure that you have scores for all the teams that attended. Remember, we talked about checking them off as they went through. And then there's a score summary sheet. This comes in your packet at the beginning of the day. It's front and back, single sheet of paper, usually colored, and you want to just read the instructions and fill it out as it says. And the front of it's very straightforward. The back of it varies a little bit according to the event. If your event had ties, or if there are multiple tiers, then there's a little bit more work to do there. But just follow the instructions, and then you're going to take that into what we call score counseling, where they'll finalize your scores. Now, for all of this process of scoring, at the end of the day, you can come to the score room to do this, and we have volunteers there that will help you grade a test if your event has a test, and will help you do transcription checks. That's an important check we do to make sure that the numbers from the individual checklists make it into the spreadsheet properly. And there are people there to help you do this, and it's very helpful to getting the scores done promptly so that the awards ceremony can start on time.
I'm going to say a word about a transcription check. That sounds kind of confusing. We're just asking that you sit down with another volunteer, and usually you could do this in 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They quickly read through the numbers on the score sheets, and you check and go across in the spreadsheet and make sure you entered them right, or vice versa. And right. It's just a straight up check.
Yep.
It goes very quickly.
Yep. But we catch a lot of errors that way. So, okay, a word about cleanup. Cleanup is there's a funny issue with cleanup. Ideally you should complete the scoring before you clean up, because the scoring holds up the awards ceremony. However, there's a funny thing that can happen where the custodial staff, seeing that you're not in the room anymore because you went off to the score room, will lock the door behind you. And then you can't get back into cleanup. You can't get your stuff out of the room anymore. So you want to kind of pay a little bit of attention to this. And there's a bunch of ways you can mitigate this problem. One is that if you've been transcribing your checklists into the score sheet all through the day, you'll have a lot less work to do at the end of the day. So that helps out. If you can catch the custodian wandering around through the day, you can warn them that at the end of the day you'll be gone for a little while and then you'll come back and clean up, so please don't lock the door behind me. And you can use your volunteers too. You can be transcribing the checklists into the score sheet while they're doing a bunch of the cleanup. You'll have to kind of direct what they're doing, but they can do a lot of that work for you. A lot of exactly how that plays out depends on the particular event, so you'll just have to think about that a little bit. But the bottom line is you need to pack up the equipment and supplies. If you can please pack it back like it came to you, and use the materials list to make sure you got it all. That really helps us out in getting ready for the next tournament. And then once you've got it packed up, move it all to the location designated by the tournament director. And again, your tournament day volunteers can help with that. That really helps us out to collect it all at the end of the day. And then putting your room back together as much like it was as you can is really nice. That's why we asked you to take pictures at the beginning of setup so that you can remember what it looked like at the beginning of the day. But if we do a good job of this, then we're more easily invited back for another year because we don't have unhappy room occupants. Hospitality is an important thing for you to know about. Lunch is provided for our ES. It's usually a box lunch. And it for most of you, it will get delivered to your location because you are running a very full schedule all day. There is a hospitality area which will have snacks and beverages through the day, coffee in the morning, and so this is a good place to visit through the day on your short breaks. To stay hydrated in particular. Don't make that mistake. Make sure you have enough to drink. And then in the week or week and a half before a tournament, keep an eye out for an email that's asking you to fill out a menu for your lunch, and fill that out in a timely fashion to help them make the order on time. Also, if you're supporting multiple tournaments, you'll get a separate email for each tournament, so be aware of that. And finally, questions to ask your Eagle ahead of time.
That's us.
That is us, yes. So for the building events, that is us. So there's you can read through these here, but if your event is a hybrid event, do you have a co-ES handling the written test for you? That's important to know. What are you responsible for bringing, and in particular, should you print out the checklists and bring them for your event? What time can you get in the morning to set up your space? What will already be set up? What are the big challenges of setup? We can help you with all of that. How many tournament volunteers can you expect? And suggestions for how to use them most effectively in your particular event. Where do you take materials at the end of the day? Where is hospitality, and do you have to fetch your own lunch? And then, of course, if you have event-specific questions, we can definitely help you with those, like about the construction parameters or scoring or whatever. But I have to emphasize, think about these things ahead of time. Ask us as early as you can, because we will not be present at every tournament on tournament day.
Or we may be running another event.
Or we may be running an event of our own, or there may be days where one of us is there and the other is not. So, yeah. So thank you very much. and we hope you have learned a lot about how to run these events. They are loads of fun to run, and we hope you have fun with yours.